Oh, you're solo then? Me, Kendrick. Now live.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Great. Did you just call the meeting to order or should I? Okay. Okay, this is Justin Miller, Chair of the Ethics and Campaign Review Board. I'd like to call this meeting to order today on March 9th, 2023. Can I have the roll call, please? Here.
Here.
Thank you. And we have a quorum. Is that right, Madam Clerk? Okay. Moving to item 3, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Mr. Biederman, seconded by Ms. Amer. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Item 4, approval of minutes. We have minutes from the meeting of December 2021. Do we have a motion to approve those board meeting minutes?
I remember this really well. Also move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Biederman, seconded by Ms. Amer. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion is approved also. Moving on to the discussion agenda and possible action. Item A is a discussion item regarding the City of Albuquerque election ordinance. And for presentation on that, we will hear from Mr. Biederman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I regret that because I've been really busy analyzing bills from another worth, that's at the legislature. I really haven't had time to look at that. So I would have to ask that be postponed. It's a bill involving the ordinance in Albuquerque has to do with disclosures. And I thought that we better get this one squared away first, and then we'll see what may be left that we want to add. So I'll ask that we remove that.
Okay, so mostly deferral of that discussion, but can you just tell us for our benefit?
This is regarding bill number 2023-11, introduced by Councilor
No.
Romero Worth.
No, we're looking at item 5A.
Okay.
And this is just Paul was going to give us a little bit of a discussion about changes happening in Albuquerque, in the city of Albuquerque. He's not ready for a full discussion on that, but I just would like to hear a little bit about the basic subject matter, and without getting into, I want you to have to get into more detail than you're ready for.
Well, it had to do with disclosure. That's what it had to do with disclosures by councilor elected officials, I think mayor as well. And in the context of elections, and also in disclosures that were not election related, because they had to do with just the potential for conflicts of interest for sitting officials. So it was, I was interested in what they did and thought we might want to look at it, but I think given what we've just gotten here, we're likely to deal with some of those issues now, and then we can consider this other one for the non-election aspects of disclosure that I think are still of interest.
Okay, and so this is an ordinance that has been passed by Albuquerque, and
That's my
merits
understanding.
some consideration by us.
That's my
See
understanding.
if we
Yeah.
can take some lessons from.
Yeah.
Okay. So that sounds like an item that we should keep on our radar for discussion at the next meeting. Are there any
Well-
questions or other discussion?
Well, let me just add that if I had had time, I would have put something together, not just talked about it verbally. I would have actually provided the ordinance and a chance to look at it beforehand, and I just couldn't do it. I've been working full time.
Okay. Well, let's keep that in mind for next time and we can try to schedule a meeting. What do you think about the time frame for consideration of this issue?
April, I think would be good.
After the session.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
the session ends next week. My recovery time may take longer, so I think
Okay.
April.
Okay, we'll talk about a follow-up date. Okay, great. Any other discussion or thoughts on that?
No, well, if anybody can, if it's possible for anyone to get the ordinance from the city, if there's that kind of connection, that would be helpful. To recently adopted it was late last year that they adopted this ordinance on disclosures. I think it would be pretty easy to find. Someone can do that. If not, I'll dig it out after the session.
You can find it and provide it to the board? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on item 5A?
No.
Okay, moving on to item 5B. This is consideration of bill number 2023-11, sponsored by Councilor Carol Romero Worth. Broadly speaking, it's a bill to amend provisions of the election and political campaign codes. Primarily updating definitions and other provisions to be consistent with state law. And taking certain portions of the code, particularly definitions that are repeated in two different areas and combining them into one or making reference to one. And a few other relatively minor cleanup issues. I don't characterize the definitional changes as minor or cleanup, but some of the other issues are. Madam Clerk, would you like to present on this item?
Yes, Chair. Miller, I would love to just give a brief overview, as you kind of mentioned. One thing that we recognized after the last election, it was we needed to kind of continue to align the city code with the local election act, and a huge part of that was definitions. The city of Santa Fe had an extensive definition list, and we actually had two definition sets, both in section 9.2 and 9.3, which did cause some confusion for candidates. And so what I worked with Senior Assistant Attorney Marcos Martinez, who unfortunately was double booked and would have liked to have joined us today. And what we also found is that the state definitions are much shorter, they're much more concise, and they're a bit more user-friendly, I'll say, for individuals. And so that was a big push for us with the definitions as we kind of continue to navigate moving from municipal election city to a city that participates in the local election act. And then, as I mentioned, we thought that it would be beneficial for users to have a single definition section in our code versus having duplicate definitions or definitions in two sections of our code. So we previously had a section in 9-2 and then in 9-3 of our code. We also just, in going through the code, found a variety of areas where there was maybe room for us to simplify the process. And I can just quickly go over a few of those, which include the deputy campaign treasurer. In our elections, candidates have a treasurer, and if they don't have a treasurer, then the candidate themselves is able to step into that role until they reappoint a treasurer. So that was kind of an area that we thought we could just again streamline and create a bit more user-friendly style code. Another confusion that we were looking to correct is that the code uses participating candidate when referring to the publicly financed candidates. And so there was some confusion in that because technically all candidates are kind of participating in the election. And so we had some candidates that we felt it would be helpful to further define that they're publicly financed candidates. And that's actually a slight nod to, I think, a larger code rewrite that we'd like to look at with the ECRB after this election cycle, which is, our publicly financed campaign code and process. Is that something that's working for our city? Do we feel like there's further adjustments that need to be made in terms of amounts or process? And so this seemed like a really great first step to help define the term in a bit more direct way. And then again, there's other modifications. There's a kind of non-binding reference to signing a form that you have familiarity with the campaign code. This is for candidates. And if you don't sign the acknowledgement form, we just basically say you don't sign the acknowledgement form. So there was kind of a unnecessary signature of forms for things that, you don't do it. And that's that. Thanks, Xavier. And then the one other section that we noted was our campaign reporting schedule. We have more reports than other municipalities. And so what we looked at doing was expanding the reporting period. And this was, again, for candidates, we kind of stacked previously our reporting. So we didn't have the first report until 45 days before the election, whereas 60 days kind of captures a bit more of the overall election spending. And then having candidates come in the day before the election, there was some feedback that was, there's a lot going on the day before the election. And so they're trying to prepare financial statements. And then we added an end date in that reporting because our code previously had some flexibility, and so candidates could, leave accounts open and didn't have to close them, and then they could close them after 6 months. And if there still was assets, they could just keep reporting. And so again, consistent with other practices, there's an end date, you submit a final report, and then we just close that out and kind of leave that kind of there. And then the last change is that we're looking to explicitly allow electronic contributions. We ran into this in the last election. Obviously, with the use of technology, more people are using some cash apps to collect payments, also to collect signatures. And the city is also moving forward with technology. We're looking at a website that will actually track online contributions and $5 campaign contributions for qualifying contributions. And so this would just make it very clear that this is allowable. And in my, it's also a nod to the fact that we are trying to move towards a more technology.
21st century.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's a little bit more, and just again, kind of embracing that. We made that modification for the electronic signatures, and we'd like to do it for electronic contributions. So Chair Miller, that's kind of a very broad and brief overview, but I'm happy to stand for questions or have discussion. I think member wants to.
Samer?
Yes, regarding electronic campaign, the contribution section, you cross-reference the State Uniform Electronic Signature Act. Does that provide for the provision of a like a user fee when you make the electronic contribution? Because for instance, I'll just give you an example, like if you renew your your car registration and you use the website and want to make an electronic payment, they tack on a user fee and we pay it. And I'm thinking, oh, well, that would be good for the city to do that because it's going to cost money, right? To have this electronic payment system. So how does that work? And do we need to take care of that in this ordinance?
Great question. Thank you so much. Chair Miller, Member Amer.
And just before, can you point us to the page number or section number of that you're?
Yeah, I just. Okay. C, and it is 9-3.6, seed money contribution, and then C is on page
Got it.
38.
38. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, please.
We did take that into consideration. Right now, the software that we're looking to use is one that we already have with the city, and the city already actually pays the transaction fee as part of a larger process. So we would be collecting contributions under technology that we already have in a tool, and so the city would have the fee. So that residents would still just be donating the $5 and candidates would just be receiving the $5. And that's actually one of the things that came up in the previous election was that extra fee and who would be collecting it. And by our code, you collect $5 full. And so you collect $5. But by using a system that we already have in place, we already have that fee. The city already covers that fee as part of a larger agreement. So that would allow us to just collect $5.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the
Just
question.
to be clear, so that means the person making the contribution only pays the exact amount. The city only collects the exact amount and any fee.
That he pays for in
It's
another
Separate agreement
separate agreement. Mhm.
that covers other electronic payments.
All electronic payments. Yes, that residents.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. I do remember that this was an issue that we were
Right.
dealing with and
Yeah.
endorsed the concept. I don't know that we ever came. I think it was left to the city to figure out the nuts and bolts. And it sounds like you have done that. That's good. Ms. Amer, anything else?
Well, and then the next thing was, it talks about a fund that the money goes into. Oh, to the city, yeah, I'm on page 39D. All qualifying contributions received by a candidate shall either be deposited in the candidate's campaign depository and then to the city clerk for deposit in the public finance, or shall be directly deposited public campaign finance in the case of certain electronic. Well, what do you mean by certain? Wouldn't that be in the case of all electronic contributions? If they would go directly into the campaign finance fund? And does the campaign finance fund already exist? I noticed that you're putting the words in there. But that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't already exist. Maybe it already exists and you're just making it clear that it now exists and has a name. Just
Chair Miller, Member Amer, wonderful question. Thank you so much. We struggle to add the clarification for this because there's basically three parts to this. One is that even though we're providing the opportunity for residents to collect, candidates to collect $5 for their qualifying contributions, there's nothing that says they can only collect electronic payments. So there's still traditional campaigning where people collect $5 in cash or $5 via check. And so before we introduced, this is the great debate of technology as we still have to live through this transition. So in this case, people would go door to door, I'd get $5 from you, and then I, as a candidate, would have my own fund. And at the end of my qualifying period, when I collected all of my contributions, then a candidate would come to the city clerk's office and write us a check from their account, from their election account to us, and then I would deposit it into the city's public campaign fund. In this process, hybrids are fun. Candidates can still collect traditional $5 cash payments, put them in their account. What I'm really hoping is that people will only use our online portal. And so then the contributions, candidates don't have to worry about setting up an election account. They don't have to worry about collecting $5 in cash. They can walk up to someone's house and say, hey, scan the app. Like, you can put in your information and pay your $5 with your credit card. And then it automatically goes into the public fund. And then we are tracking it through our website and able to identify, and we're working with our finance department to be able to say, yes, this candidate collected 50 contributions on this day, and this money is already in our campaign account. And that's the account that we pay their large publicly financed candidate amounts out of. That is that fund. So we did add some language to further clarify that, because in the code, it's just referenced as the fund. So we were trying to add additional clarification that it was the public campaign finance fund. And then the last piece of that is, some candidates in the last election were already utilizing Venmo or like ActBlue, certain apps that are available for candidates that are seeking contributions. And so in the event that they collect that money and it's transferred into their own personal account, and then they write a check to the city of Santa Fe. So we kind of thought through all the different ways that we were going to be receiving contributions. And so that's why the added definition kind of expanded on that a bit. I hope, is that?
Yeah, that all makes sense. I noticed another change is, so the candidate's campaign depository, that's their bank, right? But you had non-interest bearing there, and now you got rid of it. So it could be interest bearing.
What we ran into last year is that many of the accounts that are available now through employee credit unions, banks, they weren't doing non-interest bearing
Yeah,
accounts.
I didn't even really know that such a thing existed either.
Neither did I until last year. Or last election cycle. And so this is just to help. These accounts are open for a very short period of time, because they are, the whole election cycle from when you qualify to when you run is short. And so that's just flexibility. We had candidates that were struggling to open bank accounts, or saying like, where is a financial institution that I can even open this type of account at? So that
More flexible.
we're trying to make it easier for more people to run. And that was something that came up multiple times. And there's actually, not getting too ahead of myself, but I think in another version of code updates that we would like to bring forward at some point, there's even more flexibility and creating some options, because banks require like a declaration of candidacy, but that doesn't come until much later in the process. And so we're trying to figure out ways that we can identify potential candidates earlier, so that they can open bank accounts, and so that they can start doing for both publicly and privately financed candidates.
So I'm assuming, but I don't really know, that there's another place in the city code that talks about appropriations out of the public campaign finance fund, right? That talks about, for instance, payments to the candidate, right? And that's not in this section. Is it in another? It must be in another section, right?
Correct.
But there haven't been there are not proposed changes to those provisions, right?
Not at this time. Not at this time.
Anything else, Ms. Amer?
No,
About you, Mr. Peterman.
Got a few things. One is, well, let me just point to two apparent typos, just to, so I don't forget. On page 18, it looks like you've got two section or subsections D, one after the other, for section 7 instead of D and E. Am I right? Okay, and on page 5, I think it was just a matter of, this is just typographical, but it's significant. There's in section H or subsection H, at the end of paragraph 4, it looks like it's ending with the words accepted by, but the individual was stricken by mistake. The individual was what's supposed to be there. It was supposed to be an underlining rather than a strike through, that's all. Yeah. Just
Thank you.
clean it up. The two substantive things I've got, I think the more important one, if I'm correct about this, I noticed that on page 10, I think it's page 10. Yeah, okay. When you're defining independent expenditure, I'm saying you, I mean, obviously when the rule defines independent expenditure, it talks about it being made by a person other than a candidate or campaign and not a coordinated expenditure. And it has to be made to pay for an advertisement that expressly advocates election or defeat of a candidate susceptible to no other reasonable interpretation than appealing to vote on this thing, and then refers to a clearly identified candidate or ballot question. I remember discussions we had about other forms of coordination, such as not advertising, such as coordinating lists. So like if there's a political action group that's going door to door, and they coordinate their list of Democrats, let's say, the likely voters with the campaign. That's not advertising, but it is coordination, at least under the laws I understand. So I'm thinking we need to bring that back in. I think that's actually in some ways a more aggressive and possibly more damaging form of coordination even than this. Am I remembering correctly that was an issue for
I
us?
do remember that discussion.
Yeah. And I know that, when I've worked on campaigns, that's been one issue is, that we have those lists that are very valuable and you coordinate with those, and that's because they really are getting the likely voters and you want to get them out, not advertising them. So I think this definition needs to be broadened to at least include that. And I'm trying to remember, I think there are some other examples of coordination besides advertising. Nothing comes to mind right offhand, but can you think of any?
Well, it could be something that isn't a payment. It could be an in-kind. And this is limited to and made to pay for an advertisement. So you could make
Right.
an expenditure that isn't necessary,
Oh, yeah.
that's in kind. Like you could say, well, somebody who normally rents out a space. That would be a donation. I mean, I guess we might have a definition of donation somewhere.
Right, but sorry. But
I don't know how that would relate to this. The word expenditure, why is that word used? is the word expenditure means is related to money, generally limited, and it's actually a payment, but a lot of contributions have value. Can be something of value without being an expenditure. Is
You
my
have to-
point.
Just also look at the definition
Oh,
subsection,
okay.
which includes things other than strictly a transfer of money or a payment of money. But I think these are just, I know you're about
Other
to,
being of value, I see.
is this definition taken straight from the state code?
Chair Miller, yes, that is correct. When we were doing a comparison of definitions, our definition of coordinated expenditure was actually 5 times longer than the state definition. And when we were adopting the state definitions, you are correct. This is the definition taken directly from the state code.
What a, I'm
I'll
sorry.
I'll just to, there's some benefit to that, but there's also, I don't want to lose sight of the long and hard road to get to that previous definition that was really long and convoluted. But there was a lot of discussion and work that went into that.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
like the board to be aware of by if the vote is to recommend going to the state code, you're simplifying things and adopting the work of the legislature, but eliminating some of that thought and work that went into the previous definitions, which might be a good idea in a lot of respects.
Yes, and I'm actually, this was the one question I was really hopeful that senior attorney Marcos Martinez would be available for. I think he worked on this and we specifically had a conversation about these definitions. I know that there was a lot of work that went into developing them with the ECRB, but you are correct, Chair Miller, the definition that we've proposed in the code is from the state and part of the standardization of definitions, but I recognize that there was a lot of work done before my time with the clerk's office to create this definition of independent
And
expenditure.
if I may, I remember some of the other things we talked about polling. If 2 different groups or 3 groups involved in a campaign are trying not to coordinate, and they pay for the same pollster, or they chip in jointly to pay for the pollster, it seems like that would be okay. And I think we specifically included that as forbidden in our rule, whatever the state did. Also consultants, hiring consultants on, well, messaging or not even that, just hiring, because that's advertising, I suppose, but you're not paying for advertising. You're paying for someone to, to figure out what's the best way you can decide, how you can message something and what messages to take and not take. That would be a kind of a close call as to whether that's advertising or not. I just think those are things that really concerned us when we adopted the first definition, and we put them in. I haven't had time to look at it, but as I recall, that was in the first one. And I think we'd like to, I for one at least would like to keep it there. I'm surprised the state didn't keep it in. I mean, Peter Worth was very adamant about that.
I just on the subject, I'll raise another part of this definition that I think is of some concern, and that's subsection 3B that says it is susceptible to no other reasonable interpretation than as an appeal to vote for or against an identified candidate. It's making, I think it makes it very hard, or it leaves a lot of wiggle room for the argument that something is not an.
But it's limited to an average.
Yeah, too.
Yeah, it is.
It is, because it says 1, 2, and 3 are and. So it's not
Yes.
or.
Mhm. You know, it definitely is limited to advertising. That's my
Yeah.
point. Yeah, I agree. So what,
So an independent expenditure wouldn't be like my example of hosting a big get together at somebody's place that generally,
right,
that's not an average.
right. And
It's value, a lot of value, perhaps, if it was like a really big gosh, right temple.
I mean, yeah, and then there's hiring staff. They can hire staff, they can rent an office.
They could have food there.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. We had them. I think we had all that in our original rule.
This is limited. So there could be a lot of independent expenditures, so to speak, that don't fit within this rule because
Yeah.
they're not paying for an advertising.
Yeah, I think I'd like us to go on the record, concern, expressing our concern that this change being limited to advertising does allow for coordination in other ways. And that's something that we're trying to prevent and we should continue to
Might
prevent.
be better to say maybe pay for an advertising or something.
I think we'll find it in the old rules. I think the present rules have it, yeah. Sorry, I haven't looked, but I think they do.
Let me ask a practical question about what we're here today to do and can do. And just note that, the board received this draft just a short time ago and has not had any input into it. But understanding that the city feels it's important to move forward with the changes for the next cycle. So timing is an issue. And I also note that there's 3 board members out of 5 existing and 7 that should be on the board. Is the city, I mean, I understand that one of the things the board may do today is vote to essentially endorse these changes, right? And could the board also vote to endorse these changes with certain exceptions and ask the city to work on it and consider it further? And would that allow you to go forward, with the board's thoughts or input, but without a final decision, say, on this particular definition that we agree or disagree with it? Because I'm gathering that the board members here today aren't necessarily comfortable saying, yes, we endorse this particular change. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Chair Miller. I think that that's very appropriate. That is the type of feedback and input that we would like to have, is if there's concerns with certain definitions, there's much room. I mean, we could definitely look into adopting the majority of definitions, but still keeping our own definition for certain expenditures. And from what I'm hearing, it's for the coordinated expenditure and independent expenditure. Those are the two.
Well, and I have one small one.
Well, let's just ask the board to think about. I think what I would like to see us get to is a point where we say we or the board either endorses or doesn't endorse these changes, and there are exceptions, then highlight them for the city to work on. Know that the ECRB as a whole has not endorsed that.
Okay.
Oh, also another practical question is, when is this starting the committee process?
There was public comment last night at governing body, or the option for public comment. And then it will continue through the committee process. Need to pull the schedule for it, but
13th.
It's on the agenda.
yes.
The
it goes-
13th is
There's the
next.
committee review.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
No, it's, so we go to finance committee on Monday and then quality of life on Wednesday and then back to governing body, at the end of March.
Well, a suggestion is for this body to have something in writing to the governing body prior to when they have their public hearing. I mean, when do you to have submittals by that agenda, like on 3/29? Like if we wanted to say we endorse most of it except for X, Y, and Z. What kind of when would you need that kind of a document?
Chair Miller, member Amer, I think we have a few options. There's one where we could discuss an amendment to what's proposed to exclude certain definitions and retain the city definitions in those cases. If that is the desire of the,
That may not be the only way to go. It could just be a little, a tweak to what you have here.
yes, and we absolutely can prepare those amendments and then introduce them at either of the committee meetings in advance of governing body. And I'm happy to say that it's on behalf of the ECRB or based on feedback that, you know, we drafted these amendments to take into consideration the input and feedback of ECRB. So I think I hope that answers one of the questions. That's a very formal way of drafting, and I mean, we can draft amendments and introduce them at committee for these types of modifications and changes.
Would there be a way for a subcommittee of this board to I guess bounce idea or discuss ideas with legal department in drafting or
Mhm.
as something short of having a formal revision of this and then another meeting and vote, because that's not likely to happen before. I mean, if either of the members here would like to offer their input to Marcos Martinez, that might be helpful.
Right.
I can do it. I'd really appreciate if I could do it after the session. It's just hard for me to do all this at this time. Is that too late?
Let's keep going through and we can talk more about how to, I guess, implement some of what our discussion is and as we get to the end, but
I just have a question. How do other committees communicate? Perhaps, you know, when they're asked to look at ordinances. And they may have some suggestions. How did they go about doing it?
If it's formal amendments to a bill, I apologize, Chair Miller, member Amer. If it's a formal amendment to a chair, then we draft an amendment and we introduce it and approve it at a committee. So most members will draft an amendment that, you know, replaces and with or, and there's certain amendment sheets that are submitted along in the packet to note that those are amendments that are being approved as the bill. With the council committees, once an amendment is introduced and approved at a council committee, it follows the legislation from there forward. So if it's like adopted at finance, then that's the way the bill is now presented at quality of life and then at governing body.
I can offer this. I think I'm looking at the current code 9.9-2.3K, which defines coordinated expenditure. And I think it covers everything I was talking about and, you know, that we came up with. I mean, it could be edited for, you know, length or something, but I think the concepts are there. It talks about coordination in terms of having substantial discussions concerning, not limited to, exchange of campaign strategies, polling information, voter lists, which I brought that one up. Entity making, that the entity is formed or established by or at the request or suggestion of or with the encouragement of a candidate. And these are things that I don't think are unique to our ordinance. And I think they provide the kinds of concerns we're addressing that are gone in this. There's a total of 5 categories. Well, 4 categories, and then it says what's not coordinated. And that was fairly clear, actually. I remember that.
You're highlighting a real tension here, I think, because it sounds to me like that's one of the things the city wanted to do was to clean that up and tighten the definitions and delete that language, but it's also.
That's an important one. Yeah.
Okay, were there any other concerns about a coordinated expenditure definition, independent expenditure definition, any others?
I just had one other thought. It's a fairly minor one, but if in the draft outline here, section page 5, right, it's 5. Just a minute. I'm sorry. It's trying to keep all this straight. Oh yeah. Okay. Here it is. Contribution, the definition of contribution. So it's actually section J of the definitions. And there was just one little thing that bothered me there, and that was the last sentence of that right before K. It's page 6, actually. Lines 19 and 20. It doesn't include a contribution doesn't include the value of incidental use of the candidate's personal property, home, or business office for campaign purposes. Well, I mean, if I belong to a law firm and I have one little office in there that it's my office, but if there's a lot of other space there too that all gets put to use, isn't the law firm making a contribution to my campaign? And I don't think that's allowed. I don't think that would be forbidden under this. So I think, using the some language to indicate that if the business office is really owned by someone else or owned by a larger group and I'm just one part of it, that is a contribution, and they can do it, but it's got to be reported as such. And, within the limits, of course. Okay.
Does the word incidental resolve your concern there, or do you think that's just too vague?
I think personally, I think that's too vague. Incidental is a very vague standard, and nobody is ever going to be found to have violated it. It's just too. And I mean, if I run my law practice out of that office 6 hours a day, and and then I'm running my campaign out of it 2 hours a day, is that incidental? I just think if it's my office and it's a solo office, that's one thing. But if then it is okay because it's mine. But if it's being donated to me by a law firm that I work for or that I'm of counsel to or something like that, and I think that is a donation and a significant one. It saves a lot of money on rent. So I would say that needs to be relooked at. Hopefully changed.
Else, any other issues?
That's all I had. That's all I was able to find. Again, I didn't compare the existing this against the existing rule, so I could probably find some other stuff if I did, but these are the things that stood out to me.
Ms. Amer?
I don't have anything else.
I have a question about whether any significant changes or any changes were made to the dollar thresholds for reporting expenditures and contributions.
Will you, sorry, Chair Miller, you mean,
Well, one of the difficult issues we've wrestled with in the past is what threshold to set for requiring reporting of independent expenditures or coordinated expenditures, and whether, you know, what the constitutionally permissible level threshold is. And I'm wondering if these changes made any changes to those thresholds that we need to be made aware of.
Chair Miller, I don't believe they did. I know like in the political committee, like expending $5,000 was both in our code and state. And my understanding is that the last changes to threshold amounts that were approved were consistent with the state. And so there weren't changes at this time that would deviate from that, since we're adopting the state changes in a.
Well, here I can be maybe a little more specific. If I'm looking at section 9-2.6 on page 13 and 14. And this is addressing independently sponsored campaign communications and reporting. We had a threshold of $500 or more, which was which this board recommended the increase to 500 because our previous level was too low. And it looks like that amount was retained, which is different from the state, because the state law addresses non-statewide elections and statewide elections. So I was glad to see that stayed the same. I'm just asking if there are any other thresholds like that you know of that were changed or were not changed that we may not have noticed in our brief time to review the bill.
No, Chair Miller, when we adopted ordinance 2021-16, I think that's probably one of the areas that the ECRB worked on, which was to amend the definition of political committee and then include the threshold of $5,000. That stayed consistent. And then the second was to increase the expenditure amount for the independently sponsored contributions, and that was 500, and that also stayed consistent. And then we exempted amounts under $25 from reporting requirements, again, through ordinance 2021-16, and that stayed consistent as well.
Okay. I think we've touched on all the specific issues that I had a question about. Yes, please.
Let me just add that I do appreciate the fact that there's been a good effort here to reduce the verbiage and the very difficult. I mean, I've had trouble reading these myself, and just glad I never ran for office, because if I had, I don't think I could have complied. So I do appreciate the fact that we're trying to make this easier, and I encourage that. I just just have to be careful about it's a tricky business to try to. The reason all that verbiage is there is because there's a lot of potential things we tried to anticipate, and sometimes we anticipated things and maybe said it too many times. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Thank you, Chair Miller and Member Biederman. I think that was, if I can express a desire, was to try to make the code more readable. And also, you know, with the transition to the Local Election Act, we did receive last year confusion from candidates or that maybe had looked up information online for the state, you know, the Secretary of State's office, and then would come in. We found that with reporting with PACs. I had 2 PACs that registered with the Secretary of State's office. And then I reached out because I noticed there was campaign material and they were like, oh, we registered. And so part of it is navigating the fact that we've transitioned into kind of this new not quite new, but Local Election Act. I mean, really, this is only the 3rd cycle that we're coming into the 3rd cycle of it. And so that was, I think, part of it is, and also some of the realistic things that we notice people report and that we're able to prove, you know, there is a lot going through the campaign of just, again, helping people navigate what it means. And in some areas there was just a general confusion. And so that really was this effort. And there absolutely is a desire to make larger, I think, changes to the code. One goal from our office is to have a survey after the election of people who would have participated in public campaign financing, if amounts were different, if they thought the process was easy, if they felt like it was adequate and sufficient. And I've gone to a few convenings, and actually Senior Attorney Martinez has as well, to kind of start to have these conversations with other entities across the country about re-engaging people to participate as candidates, to run for office, to not feel like there's a financial burden, to make it easier for people to participate, to donate. These are all things that I'm very much interested in continuing. And so, you know, I apologize because this was just of something that we created for ourselves, but when we did compare the definitions from the state to the city, there's a big difference in the definitions. And I know there was a desire to be very thorough in our definitions. And so that was something that we considered when we looked at adopting the state definitions was, I think, just more, if there was benefit to having something that was more readable and concise and that was easier for people to digest in general, both candidates running, but then just people participating in the election or wanting to participate, because we saw that in the last election cycle also, where there was a lot of just participation in general, and a lot of people trying to reference the code and look through it and what it meant for them. And so I appreciate the feedback. We continue to just try to make small steps towards a code that we think is more user-friendly. And that was, you know, I think member Amer brought up even a definition. That was absolutely the intent for distinguishing between participating candidate and publicly financed candidate. It's a small change, but really when you're reading through the code, it helps when you're, even myself, when I'm reading through, I'm like, yep, publicly financed candidate. I think, you know, we're unique in certain situations like that. When I go to these convenings and conferences, there's 2 government municipalities in New Mexico that use public campaign financing. It's us in Albuquerque. And so these are, you know, there's carve outs for where we're very unique in our process, like qualifying periods versus, you know, we have contribution qualifying for publicly financed candidates. And then we also incorporate a normal nominating petition qualifying period into that process. And so I'd speak frequently with the city of Albuquerque as we try to kind of figure out how we work together, even in our codes, to make sure that there's consistency. So there's at least 2 of us. And we recently met with the Secretary of State's office to just kind of, again, work through the uniqueness of our piece with publicly financed candidates and definitions and what that means in a larger picture.
Yeah, and the reason I was being such a stickler about coordination is because it is an important term, because it does really define when it's possible for non-disclosures to occur, and there's a lot of implications if there's coordination, and if we don't define it carefully, we really cut ourselves off from being able to enforce those really important ones. But having said that, I really appreciate the fact, I mean, right now the legislature is battling to try to get people more access to the vote. And that was a hard enough fight as it is. And it looks like at least a good part of that is won. But if you can't run for office, the vote isn't enough. We have to have people running for office too. And if we put up a lot of obstacles to that, we're not doing ourselves or anybody else any favors. It takes enough fortitude to sit in these chairs, not the way we do, but the way the counselors do, and worry about, obelisks and things of that nature. And, the fact that they are, it takes a lot of fortitude to do that. And it shouldn't be that difficult. It shouldn't be that demanding of them. And yet they do put up with it. And I really respect them for that. It's because they got important decisions to make, but you're getting it, you can't win, you're getting it from both sides, and neither side's going to end up being happy. So I think not putting obstacles in the way of people to at least get on the ballot and to get into office is a very big move on our part. So I do appreciate the effort you're making.
Thank you, Representative Biederman. I did, if I could, sorry, Chairman Laird, I did just want to note that there is one, we were mentioning advertisement. And we, in the current city code, didn't have a definition for advertisement, but we are adding a definition that's modeled after state law that I think, again, in areas that we didn't have definitions, we're looking to add definition, and in areas where there could be modified definitions modeled after the state, and that's what we looked at. But I did actually, while we were speaking, think of that we didn't previously have a definition for advertisement, but we did adopt the one from state, or we're proposing to adopt the one in the state.
Good, thank you. Well, let's try to bring this to a resolution. It seems to me like the most straightforward way to go is for a motion and vote to be had on a general endorsement of these proposals, with the exception of the typos that you pointed out, Mr. Biederman, and the particular definitions of 9-2.3 J contribution, L coordinated expenditure, P independent expenditures. And then the city council does what it does with that action from this board. Is that right?
And I don't think we need to bring the typos into it. You'll take care of those.
Okay. Okay.
But the substantive issues, I think we do.
And so if that is the thought of the board, I would entertain a motion on that, or
I have,
something else. Ms. Amer?
I don't know how helpful it would be to just simply accept certain definitions without saying what the problems are with. They would just, they're going, okay, we don't like expenditure. What's the matter with?
Well, we do have obviously the record of this meeting. And we also, I think it would be helpful if, as follow-up, I could name a subcommittee
To write up.
to work, I think, to work with Marcos Martinez or drafters to identify and clarify and discuss the issues that the board has raised today. I don't necessarily want to commit you to drafting changes, or, that would, I think, require board action rather than committee. But I think to advise, I think there could be a role for a subcommittee to advise the legal department on some of our thoughts. If if you would be open to that, I'd be happy
Would
to.
it be the legal department or would it be the council?
Well, Marcos Martinez is is in the legal office and helped with drafting. I understand he and the clerk have worked on drafting this, and there's probably legislative drafters also, but before it gets to the council, I think you might want to hear the input from.
How about if we say that, that we in general approve of what's going on, but, this change, but, we ask that there be, that the principles from the current, election code be retained in those areas. It doesn't have to be the exact wording, but the principles of like the, coordinated expenditure and so on be retained in the new draft or re-entered into the draft or something like that. Just to basically give them a framework to work from, because I think we did cover coordinated expenditures pretty thoroughly in the old rule, in the existing rule. It's not old yet, it's still there. And we could say, that we want, we're not afraid to reward it, but we don't want to abandon it, which is what's happening now.
Got it. Okay, well, what we would like is a clear communication of the board's position to the council.
Yeah.
And so I would entertain a motion on that, and then separate from the motion, how about this? If Marcos Martinez or anybody else at the city working on this in between committees and preparing for the council would like to get further input from the board, they can feel free to contact Mr. Biederman or Ms. Amer as kind of the subcommittee on this issue. Does that work? Okay, so does anybody have a motion on this?
I had one friendly amendment.
I didn't make a motion.
Oh,
but-
okay. I thought you did, sorry. You're entertaining a motion.
Or I'm
Okay.
trying to get there. If you have a motion with your friendly amendment,
Okay.
you could go ahead and.
Maybe a motion to have a subcommittee attempt to meet with Marcos Martinez to convey
Okay,
our thoughts after the session's over.
Let's just procedure wise, I don't need a motion to name a subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
If anyone would like to volunteer for a subcommittee, I'm happy to just do that before we get to a motion on this particular bill. Okay. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So to facilitate discussion of what the board has talked about here and communicating it to the city, I will name member Biederman and member Amer to a subcommittee to be available to the clerk or the legal department or whoever might have questions and like to discuss with them. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Or are
separate
we,
from that,
okay.
how does the board want to address this, this bill that's before us and is the city's looking for action?
May I suggest, I'll try to make this a motion that we approve the effort to streamline the law, the ordinances, but are concerned about several changes. Which of these? We're concerned about changes in the definition of contributions and coordinated expenses. I can't read you the last one.
Independent.
Oh, and independent expenditures, right? Yeah, we can just do that. And that we'd like to have those reviewed, something. That's not very elegant language. but-
Clerk, is that concise enough of a motion for you? Okay, any discussion on that motion? Or do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
A motion made by Mr. Biederman, seconded by Ms. Amer. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. And there's none opposed, so the motion passes. Great, yeah, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Moving on then to matters from the staff, item 6 on the agenda.
Chair Miller and members of the ECRB, I don't have anything else. I just want to say that I really appreciate you convening to review and just look at these efforts. And that I will I look forward to further discussion both on this, but also for future updates and changes as well. So yeah, that's all I have. Just a quick thank you for your
Great,
time.
you're well, thank you. Thank you from us too. How about item 7, matters from the committee?
Matter, would it be? Oh, would you communicate? That we would be available that after the session? So anytime during the week, that following week, sort of phone call. Yeah. Whenever he's available. So
Matter for the committee. Did we really last meet on December 20th of 2021? 3:00, that's the last time we met. It's too long. I miss you guys. So I mean, it's been over a year. I think we need to meet more frequently to do our job. And I would, actually, I mean, I will try to, after the session, I will have time to look at what goes on in Albuquerque. And if you haven't already looked at it, Christine, about disclosures that they did, which I remember I was interested in. I just don't remember the details. And that could be a topic. And, you know, even if we don't have a complaint to deal with, it doesn't mean the ordinances. So I would like us to maybe schedule at least 2 meetings a year.
Good, thank you. Item 8, matters from the chair. I don't have anything to add. Next meeting, no meeting scheduled, but we will make an effort to.
I'll take on the burden of putting something together. So we'll have a
Great,
topic.
okay.
And I'll-
And item 10,
Okay.
adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Made by Ms. Amer and seconded by Mr. Biederman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.